What's up, real ones? Welcome back to the Relationship Podcast, where we're bringing the real back to relationships.
Yes, sir.
I'm Asha Steele.
And I'm Devin Steele.
And we're so excited that you guys are tuning in today with us.
Although I feel like you guys are going to be way more excited that you're tuning in because we have two special guests today.
Yes.
As I told you before, I've been studying applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. And while I was there, I came across some very interesting, studies that I felt like you guys needed to hear about. So we brought two experts on the podcast today to talk to you about marriage and love.
Yes. So let me go ahead and introduce, of course, it's my pleasure to introduce the lovely Dr. Julie Gottman, who is a world-renowned clinical psychologist, researcher, speaker, and author. She is sought internationally by media organizations and is an expert advisor in marriage, sexual harassment and rape, domestic violence, gay and lesbian adoption, same-sex marriage, and parenting issues. She is the co-founder of the Gottman Institute and also the co-creator of the immensely popular The Art and Science of Love weekend workshops for couples, and also co-designer of the National Clinical Training and the Gottman Method Couples Therapy.
Yep. And by her side, we have Dr. John Gottman. He has conducted over 40 years of breakthrough research in thousands of couples. His work on marriage and parenting has earned him numerous major awards, including 4 National Institute of Mental Health Research Scientists Award, the American Family Therapy Academy Award for Most Distinguished Contributor to Family Systems, and the National Council of Family Relations. Dr. Gottman was one of the top most influential therapists of the past quarter century by the Psychotherapy Network. He is an author or co-author of over 200 published academic articles and more than 40 books, including my new favorite and best-selling with over 1 million copies sold, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. Ladies and gentlemen, the couple who can predict whether you're going to get divorced within 15 minutes of listening and watching you, the Gottmans. Thank you for joining us today.
And we can already tell that you guys are not going to get divorced.
I'm so happy to hear, because I told my wife, I said, when we do this interview, they may be watching us to see if we're going to last. But I'm glad you said that, because it takes the pressure off of us.
Good.
That's awesome.
Good,
That's awesome.
So we want to start this interview on a light note. So, we love a great love story on the Relationship Podcast. So how did you two meet?
Well, my story is that I arrived in Seattle and school didn't start till October. I arrived in May. So I decided, since I'd been divorced for about 7 years and had been unable to meet women my own age in the college town of Champaign-Urbana, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
In Seattle, I thought I would date as much as I could. So I dated 60 women that summer. I had about 10 dates a week.
Oh, man.
So I answered every ad there was. And then one day I was sitting in a coffee shop and this wonderful looking woman walks in, and I had the courage to get up to her and ask her if she'd join me for a cup of coffee. And number 61 was Julie.
The lucky number 61.
She's number 61. And she was a clear outlier for me. She was, I just loved talking to her, and we laughed so much. And, and it was just from then on in, that was it,
Wow.
History from there.
But I had a database.
There you go. That's awesome.
So cute. And my story is that I was on my way to a party. So I dressed up in this kind of cool dress and of course, I don't go anywhere without my cup of coffee. I carry it wherever I go. And so I went in and grabbed a cup of coffee, and there he was. And he was so cute, you guys. Adorable. He had on this little black fisherman cap and a black leather coat, and he had these sunglasses, or no, they weren't sunglasses. They were actually regular glasses that change from light to dark when you go outside and then dark to light when you go inside, and they were still dark. So he totally looked like, I don't know what.
Mysterious biker.
No, not biker.
Oh, man.
He was too skinny to be a biker, but he was kind of like a real cool urban lefty
radical dude.
radical
Right.
activist
Yeah.
of some sort.
Well,
And
that was true, actually. Yeah.
yeah, he actually was, and
Yeah.
so was I, though I didn't have a black leather coat. And so we just immediately, it was like an immediate connection. I'd also been divorced for about 7 years.
Right.
And on our second date, he told me that I think he was dating, I don't know, maybe number 27 or
Yeah,
something
right.
at the same time. And he told me that he had told her he wasn't going to continue to date her because he found somebody he wanted to see if the relationship would work. And
Right.
he told me that on the second date. I immediately had a panic attack.
Yeah, scared the heck out of
Oh
her.
my
Right.
God. I stopped breathing for about 3 hours. And then he proposed 5 months later. That was
Oh, wow.
Wow, so it didn't
Yeah.
take long for you to know that she was the one.
No, it didn't. I had a
That's
dream
awesome.
about her that very weekend after I met her, but her dress had turned into the pattern of this tiger
Mm.
that was prowling the woods, and it made me feel real safe. So Tiger is one of my nicknames for her.
Aw,
Oh.
She's a tiger.
that's sweet.
So it's good to know that you guys have a very positive look back at your past, because I know that's a sign of whether the marriage is going right or not.
Mhm.
Oh, that's right, Devin.
So why did y'all decide to study love? Were y'all on those same paths individually, or did y'all collectively decide to go on
Well,
that
she
path?
wasn't that interested in it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was. So I actually was doing a lot of individual work. I was working with trauma. I was working in the Boston ghetto, working with heroin addicts, PTSD, Vietnam vets, folks who were psychotic, really focusing in on also people in poverty.
Right.
And so that was a lot of my work. And in graduate school, after graduate school, I'd worked with folks on Skid Row, downtown LA.
Mhm.
And so it was all about trauma for me. And the other thing I was focusing on was cancer patients and their families.
Oh, okay.
So working with that as well. And thought I'd just be a little individual therapist for the rest of my life. And then I met him. And what ended up happening is that I tried really hard to stay on my path for 9 years after we married, but he would come home and tell me about his research. And it was so friggin' interesting that I finally, it was like, falling into this gravitational pull of doing the work together. And we started the Gottman Institute in 95 95. And the rest is history.
Wow.
Yeah, and the reason I started studying couples with my best friend Bob Levinson in the 1970s was because both of us were completely incompetent at relationships.
Right.
We were two clueless guys, and we figured since we didn't know anything about relationships, we would do research on it. So we had no hypotheses, no idea about what makes a relationship work. We just brought couples into this lab, some of whom had really great relationships and many of whom had really disastrous relationships, and we just studied them. Bob was trained in studying physiology. He was studying psychosomatic illnesses like asthma and high blood pressure and diabetes and things like that. And so he got real interested in measuring emotion because that lies behind a lot of disease. So we had this laboratory in the 1970s. Nobody had their own computer, but our lab had a computer about the size of 3 refrigerators.
Wow.
But all it did was synchronize the physiology that we're collecting with the video that we're collecting also. So couples just came in and talked about how their day went. and talked about an area of conflict, but we could tell what their heart rate was at every instant, how fast their blood was flowing, how much they were sweating, jiggling around. So we could link the video and what they were doing with each other and the emotions they were expressing to what was going on in their bodies. And we were kind of shocked that our first group of couples that we studied, we contacted them 3 years later, and we could predict with almost perfect accuracy what had happened to their relationships in a 3-year period.
Right.
So that's what we kept studying. Bob and I, kept studying the same group of, using the same methods, but new groups of couples. And I was trained as a child psychologist, so I was real interested in kids, and we studied newlyweds. When I moved to Seattle, Julie and I built the apartment lab where 130 newlywed couples went through, and we studied them as many of them became pregnant and had babies, and we studied the babies, learned how to study babies and parents, and watched the babies develop, and looked at child development in relationship to the parents as well, and looked at the kids' friendships with other kids. What were their relationships like? How did they build relationships when they were real little? And did that make a difference in their life? So that's kind of what we did. And we spent a dozen years studying gay and lesbian relationships too.
Right.
And so all of our findings generalize across the whole life course, from, beginning of relationships when they're dating, all the way through couples in their 90s. And Bob and I studied couples for as long as 20 years, the same group of couples. So we were kind of surprised by our findings, but more and more we began to understand what we discovered. And then teaming up with Julie 25 years ago, because she really knew how to do therapy with people who were really messed up. And, Bob and I just watched people deteriorate, and we were making a good living. Not trying to help anybody. But Julie was really much more expert at how do you really use this information to help people. So it was just a great team, the therapist and the researcher.
I can tell you that we appreciate you guys really doing that work, because like I tell our listeners all the time, if family is one of the most important things in your life, just having those strong relationships, it should be a number one priority, that people should actually be studying this and learning how to have a family that flourishes. Because a lot of us, I know me and my wife, Asha, we didn't come from a background where we actually got to see love growing up. We both came from broken homes. And when we got married, we realized that we didn't really have an understanding of what it takes to have a strong marriage. So we then begin to study it so that we can, be those people in our family or in our generation that breaks those curses and has a family that really flourishes. And with this podcast episode, I want to end it on a good note. So I want to talk about the tough things in the beginning, right? Some of the things that stuck out to me by reading the book, and I'm pretty sure you get a lot of these questions. In the book, you had 6 predictors of divorce. And the one that really stuck out to me was the 4 horsemen. And ever since I read that, I started to analyze our marriage and see if we had those creeping up on us. So can you touch on a little bit of what the 4 horsemen are and how they apply to relationships or a sign of divorce?
Why don't you do it, baby? Yeah. Okay. And by the way, Devin and Asha, you guys are not alone. So many people have no idea of how to build relationships. They don't see it in their families, and nobody takes relationship 101 in high school, right?
Yeah.
So, how are you going to learn? Well, you watch TV, and TV is melodrama, so you're not going to see anything real, right? So everybody and their mother doesn't know how to do relationships these days. That's part of why we really wanted to work on figuring it out. So let me talk about at least the 4 horsemen first. So the 4 horsemen are the 4 biggest predictors of relationship demise, things going down. So first of all, criticism. So a lot of us get criticized, right? We get criticized from our parents, our teachers, people in the community, anybody. Politicians. And what criticism means is that you blame a problem on a personality flaw of your partner. So you say things like, you're just too lazy to clean up the kitchen.
Right.
Now, more subtle criticisms exist too, like saying, you never pick up the kids on time. Well, using words like always or never are also criticisms.
Right.
You wouldn't think so, but they are, because they imply a personality flaw again. If you always do something, that says something about who you are as a human being, right? It's not just a behavior, but something about you. So there's no such thing as constructive criticism. It's really important to know that. So what does criticism bring up? It brings up defensiveness, which is number 2. So defensiveness means you feel attacked and you either counterattacked or you deny what your partner is saying. So defensiveness is going to sound like, oh yeah, well, you didn't pay the bills. There's the counterattack. Or I did too pick up the kids on time. There's the denial of what your partner is saying. So defensiveness doesn't work either. You're just bouncing things back. Number 3 is contempt. And contempt is the worst predictor of all time. Contempt is when you are criticizing, but from a place of superiority. So there's a sneer, there's some scorn. And it sounds like calling people bad names or using sarcasm or using mockery. One of our favorites is something like correcting somebody's grammar when they're trying to share some feelings with you. So contempt
That's
is
my
really,
favorite.
Yeah, we collect ways of being contemptuous.
Right.
So the other thing about contempt that is extraordinary is that the number of times a listener hears their partner being contemptuous predicts how many infectious illnesses they're going to have in the coming years. So what that means is that contempt erodes not only the relationship, but the immune system too of the other person. So that's like astounding. Wow. The 4th horseman is what we call stonewalling.
Which I suffered from a lot.
Yeah. So stonewalling is interesting. Stonewalling is when one person completely shuts down as the other person is trying to talk to them and doesn't respond at all. Doesn't look at them, doesn't say a word, doesn't nod their head, show that they're listening, like, doing this stuff. Nothing. They turn into a stone wall. Now, here's the interesting thing. When John and Bob looked at the data, what they found is that the people who stonewalled had escalated higher physiology going on. They had gone into fight or flight. So they could be sitting there as calmly as John and me, but the person who was stonewalling would have a heart rate over 100 beats a minute. Or if they were really athletic, let's say, over 80 beats a minute, which would be their normal rate, which showed that they were probably feeling attacked. They were in fight or flight, but they'd frozen themselves in order to try to withdraw from the interaction and try to soothe themselves inside, but it wasn't working.
Right.
That's stonewalling. It's not somebody's intention to punish the other person by stonewalling. That's what a lot of other partners will think. You're just shutting down because you want to punish me. Not true. They're shutting down because they're in fight or flight, and all they can hear is attack, even if you're saying to them, honey, I really love you.
Right.
That's stonewalling. That's the 4th one.
You said something really interesting in the beginning that I think is going to catch a lot of viewers and listeners' ears, where you said that there's no such thing as constructive criticism. And I think that's very important to touch on, because we're taught that our whole life, that as long as it's constructive criticism, it's okay. And some people may take that and think, well, maybe I shouldn't talk about the issues that I have. But I think in the book, you talked about complaints over criticism, right? Being able to complain, because complaining has three parts that you're asking of your partner. Can you describe those three parts that a complaint has and how that's different than criticism?
Absolutely. So here's what complaint sounds like. First of all, you're focusing on I. You're describing yourself. You're not describing your partner. Criticism says you're lazy. It's finger pointing at your partner. Instead, you're pointing at yourself and you're saying, first, I feel something. Like I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm sad. You say what you're feeling, what the emotion is. The second part is about what? What's the situation? Not what's wrong with the partner, but what's the situation? I'm upset that the bills haven't been paid. The bills haven't been paid is a neutral statement, right? It's not a blaming statement. It's just situation. And the third thing that you say is, here's what I need. Here's what I need to make it better. And you make that need something positive rather than negative.
Right.
A positive need means saying what you do want. And it's really telling your partner how your partner can shine for you, which partners are going to welcome, because a lot of us actually love our partner and want to please them. We just don't know what they're looking for, what they want.
Right.
So if we tell them what we're looking for, that gives them a recipe for how to succeed with you.
We talk about that a lot, right? We call it unexpected expectations. Like we all expect certain things from people, but we think that it's just natural that people are supposed to just do it, but we all come from different backgrounds. So unless you really talk about those expectations, then a person can't really deliver what you want from them, because they don't know that that's what you want.
Right.
That's right.
Exactly.
Yes. So if a couple is experiencing all four of the four horsemen, is it too late for them to fix it, or do they still have hope, pretty much?
Well, that's kind of what the last 25 years have been about. Can we, we knew that there were masters of relationships and disasters. Bob and I weren't the masters by a long time, and could we turn a disaster into a master, or could we prevent disaster? And the answer is absolutely yes. You can turn this around. And even on our weekend workshop, we can turn around, a lot of relationships headed for disasters. 2/3 of the newlywed couples, when they had a baby, the relationship went down.
Right.
Only 1/3 of them didn't. They sailed through becoming parents. But by studying what was different about the people who really succeeded and it didn't take a toll on the marriage, and looking at the differences between those people and the people who really, suffered with the first baby coming, Julie and I could design a workshop, and then almost 80% of couples, when they took the weekend workshop, didn't have that drop in relationship happiness.
Wow.
So we can prevent disaster and we can turn it around also. So it's not too late at all. I mean, we really, by studying how the masters of relationships do it, we were able, the two of us, to develop a therapy that really seems to work and can really turn it around.
Is another indicator of whether a relationship can make that turnaround is the fondness and admiration system. And so
Exactly.
what is that?
Yeah, well, let me talk about that. So, this is something we learned in our apartment laboratory when people were just hanging out for 24 hours, no instructions at all, was that the masters of relationship, they use these very small moments to communicate appreciation and affection and respect for their partner. And they just say these little things like, thanks for making the bed. And I enjoyed talking to you at dinner. That was a fun conversation we had. And, or saying, you look really hot this morning. I'm having all these lewd thoughts about you. They'd be peppering their interaction with, these positive moments. They'd be really scanning their world to see what they could appreciate. Mm-hmm. And the people who were disasters, they had a different habit of mind. They were scanning their social environment to see what they could criticize, what they could, looking for their partner's mistakes and trying to correct those mistakes. So that positive habit of mind, winds up getting you to actually see positive things that are there. It's not looking at the world with rose-colored glasses. So therapists, when they first started designing couples therapy programs, they just assumed that an unhappy couple, they're probably not very nice to each other. So let's have love days where we tell them to be really nice to each other. And it turned out that was wrong. Unhappy couples are actually doing a lot of very nice things for each other, but the partners aren't noticing it.
Yeah.
So it was really, changing perception that was so important. They were doing good things, but they missed 50% of the positivity. So creating that fondness and admiration system is absolutely critical. And it just involves changing what you perceive, really seeing what's there. You want to add anything to that?
No,
Okay.
that was all right. That was perfect.
Okay,
I appreciate you.
There you go.
Such a good answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I heard you touch a little bit on couples that have their first baby a little bit, and we actually talked about it a little bit from your reading as well. And with us having our first child, Arya, a year ago, I kind of want to, not too much, but just kind of go in a little bit of what that dissatisfaction is in a relationship when you have your first baby and how you can kind of fix that so that you aren't headed down divorce or having trouble in your relationship pretty much.
Yeah, and Dr. Julie, I think you touched on this too, was having rituals of connection, which I think was important. We would like you to touch on that as well.
Oh, sure. So what can happen, first of all, is that you stop sleeping, right? Because baby is up. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
So baby is, keeping you up at night. You're not sleeping. And first of all, there's old research, and it's still true to this day, that after 30 days of either disrupted sleep or fewer hours of sleep, anybody will show signs of depression after 30 days of that. Think of that. So, you may not be sleeping for months, very little. So you're going to be, for example, more irritable, maybe more serious. You may lose your sense of humor. You don't want to do stuff. You may not want to have sex. There's, lots of difficulty just with the loss of sleep after you have a baby. The other thing that can happen, and this happens a lot with families when there's extended family around, there's, aunts or grandparents, whatever, is that the woman creates a circle around herself of support. As she is learning how to breastfeed the baby and change the baby and take care of the baby and so on, the women around her are kind of circling the wagons around her to support her, to be there for her. So what happens to dad? Well, dad gets pushed out of the circle, right?
Yep.
So what do dads feel like? Well, dads get the message from the culture, from everything else, that being a good dad means being a good provider, right? So they go to work and they work harder to bring in as much money as they can.
Right.
And so they're more absent from mom. They're absent from baby too.
Right.
So, those are just a couple of the things. So what we found in our research that includes rituals of connection is, first of all, dads have got to stay involved. Dads play an incredibly important role with babies. Babies learn how to have fun, how to play, how to trust, because dads are throwing them up in the air like a football.
This guy.
Right? You know,
I'm guilty. I'm
pass,
guilty.
go out there, baby. You know, and that's a wonderful thing for kids. They
Right.
really need their dads. There's been research that shows how important dads are. The other thing is that rituals of connection are super important to counteract this. So what are rituals of connection? Well, first of all, they are ways that the two parents, the two of you, connect with each other, just with each other, that are predictable, that you can count on, you can rely on, that feel loving and special and really good for both of you. So let me give you some examples of that, really simple ones. First of all, how do you wake up in the morning? Do you wake up with a kiss? With a hug? Does somebody bring the other person coffee? John makes coffee every single morning, and he has for the last 32 years. And you know what? I thank him every morning, right? There's a ritual of connection. He's making the coffee and giving me coffee. It's fantastic. Saying hello at the end of the day. If you're both out at work, or one of you's coming home from work, how do you reunite at the end of the day? Do you reunite, you know, dressed in saran wrap? Do you, probably not. Do you reunite with a hug, a kiss? How was your day? You know, how do you reunite? One of the things that's really helpful for new parents as a ritual of connection is to have what we call a stress reducing conversation every night or every day after baby maybe has gone down, you know, to bed. And what that looks like is one person being a speaker and the other the listener, and then you'll trade roles after a bit. And the speaker talks about what was stressful for them outside this marriage. This is not a time to bring up complaints. It's a time to say, man, did I have a hard day? You know, baby had diarrhea all day. I was cleaning diapers like 25 times today. It was driving me nuts. And how does the listener respond? Well, the listener doesn't try to fix the problem. That doesn't work. Interestingly enough, all of us think we should as listeners. Wrong. What ends up happening is it just cuts off the speaker from saying what they're feeling and describing their own world. So what the listener can do instead is ask big questions that bring out more of what the speaker's feeling. Questions like, what was the hardest part about that for you? What was the most upsetting thing about that? Is there some, you know, big fear that, you know, is really plaguing you right now? What's that fear? So you ask questions as a listener, and the other thing you do is empathize. Empathize. So what's empathy? It's not feeling sorry for your partner or pitying your partner. Instead, it's saying, God, that just sounds terrible. You must have felt so tired. You must have felt so upset. So you guess the feeling your partner's having. And then you say, boy, I get it. I can understand how you'd feel that way. I get it. You don't try and minimize your partner's feeling by saying, don't worry about it. Just cheer up. You just get with your partner in that feeling, because the greatest stress reliever in the whole wide world is not feeling alone with stress. And empathy is the glue that bonds you together, so neither one of you has to feel alone.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah, I think another thing is, you know, what Julie was saying about dads is really important. Moms are steady teachers, you know, they're solid dads are like another kid. And we really get in there and play. And what turns out to be true, and research has, in many laboratories has showed this, is that kids learn how to regulate their emotions because of dad's play. Dads get very excited and then they get bored and they switch to a different play.
Right.
And kids love it. Kids prefer that kind of play. And it's not biological. Women can learn how to play that way with babies as well. But fathers are really very special. And that comes as a big surprise to a lot of men.
Wow.
That they're that important. So that was a big part of our Bringing Baby Home program. And learning something about babies, because babies really are much slower than us adults.
Mhm.
And if you take your time with the baby, you really have a lot of fun.
Right.
Because it takes some time to respond and get with it. And it makes you slow down and really sort of tune into that baby, because there's nothing more interesting to a baby than your face and your voice.
Oh,
You know, you can't play any music more interesting to a baby than mom's voice and dad's voice, because they're already tuned into that from the time they're in the womb. They
Right.
hear, you know, your voices.
Right.
And so taking the time with the baby is very important. And then mom and dad are both a team
Mhm.
engaged in loving this creature together.
Mhm.
And so, and it's very important to make time for the relationship, independent of your parenting,
Yeah.
so that romance continues.
Yes.
You know, and there's a weekly date, and you know, and you're noticing one another, and you're taking time for those rituals of connection that Julie's talking about.
Yeah, I
So-
think that's really important now with everything going on, and I felt like we fell short of that early on, because the whole focus was on the family, the
Right.
shift that the world was going through, that we never really took time for us. And last week we decided to rent a slingshot, which is like a 3-wheeler car, motorcycle type of thing. It's kind of hard to explain. And we just went driving with no destination, right? Just to have time to connect with each other, because we haven't been able to do that for about 8 months now since everything's been going on. So I think that really helped us build up that friendship and that connection during those
Devin,
small sessions.
the greatest, you know, and Asha, the greatest gift you can give your baby is a loving relationship between the two of you. So you're not taken away from the baby by, you know, renting that thing and driving around, having adventures.
Even though we both think you're crazy.
No, I'd like to do that. It sounds like fun.
Oh,
I had a
let's do it.
motorcycle too once.
When he was like 12.
So you got to accept the influence. You're telling you not to do it.
All right.
That's right.
Okay.
Dr. Julie, can you talk to us about the importance of how you turn to your partner, whether you turn away, turn from, or turn against?
Yeah, Devin, that is such a good question. God, you guys are good interviewers. So turning toward doesn't mean like physically positioning your body toward your partner. What it means, and we saw this again in the apartment lab, it took us years to figure out what were these couples doing that were so successful. What turning towards means is when your partner makes a bid for connection. Like even just calling your name, you know, hey, Devin, or asking for something. Would you please go to the grocery store for me? You say yes. That's turning toward.
Right.
It's a small, little, tiny thing. Your partner may be making just a bid for interest, like, hey, look at, you know, listen to this story I'm reading. Or it could be something really monumental, like, honey, I'm exhausted. I really want to go away for the weekend. Can we do that? And the person who's responding to the other's bid for connection has 3 choices. Here's what they can do. The first choice is just ignore it as if it never happened. Say nothing.
Right.
We call that turning away. Or you can turn against your partner, actually, and that is responding with some hostility or criticism, like, you know, would you stop interrupting me? I'm trying to read.
Right.
That's the bad one. And turning towards. And the great thing about turning towards is it doesn't take much. I can be looking out the window and I can say to John, wow, there's that really cool boat out there. Look at that. All John has to do is to look up from, the 201st paper that he's writing, look out the window and just say, that's it. That's all it takes. It's so little. You don't have to do much. And what turning towards does is it builds your emotional bank account. That's what it does. It's putting deposits in the positive emotion between the two of you so that when you have that inevitable fight, which always happens, you've got some money left over in there, some positive stuff in that bank account so that the fight doesn't bankrupt you.
Right.
We saw in our apartment lab that the couples who were successful turned towards each other's bids 86% of the time. The ones who were not successful down the road, 33% of the time.
Right.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
So you can turn your relationship around in a very big way. I want you all to practice saying this. That's all you have to do.
And it actually confers a sense of humor when you're arguing.
Mhm.
So you can laugh at yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And, and I can say, yeah, you're right. I probably am full of it,
Right.
and laugh at myself. And so turning toward when you have a lot in the emotional bank account, it gives you so much. And it's very hard to nurse a grudge against your partner when you got a lot in the bank account.
Right. Is that what was meant by the positive sentiment override? Is that you have more positive feelings towards your partner rather than the negative ones?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And you give your partner the benefit of the doubt, so if your partner's crabby, you can say, oh, well, she probably didn't sleep very well last night, or, maybe she's really stressed right now. I'll just back off. As opposed to if you don't have much, in the emotional bank account, your partner's crabby, you go, boy, what a selfish, mean person I'm with,
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different way of thinking.
Yeah.
So we were reading that emotionally intelligent couples are familiar with each other's world, right? You describe it as the love map, right? So can you describe that to us? What exactly does that mean?
You want me to?
Yeah,
okay.
You do it.
All right. Okay. So love maps are how well do you know your partner's internal world, and how known do you feel by your partner as well? So, you should be able to answer questions like, what was my partner's most embarrassing moment in childhood?
Mm-hmm.
Who's my partner's favorite relative? Who's my partner's least favorite relative?
Right.
What's my partner's favorite food? All those kinds of questions are how well you know your partner and how well you feel known yourself. What we've seen in our research is that when couples grow distant from one another, they lose track of the other person. When you think about it, you guys, I'm sure, are really aware of this, especially with a new baby. And that is that you change over time. Your values change, your needs change, your priorities change. And you got to keep up on that in terms of who your partner is as a human being. What's really important to them. So the way to strengthen your love mapping of each other is to make time to just sit down and ask each other big open-ended questions. Questions like, so tell me, who do you want to be as a father? Who do you want to be as a mother? What characteristics do you really want to pass on from your own family? And what characteristics do you not want to pass on?
Right.
Came down from your family. So you're asking these big questions, not yes, no questions or right, wrong, but big questions. And by doing that, you really stay in tune with who your partner is and how they're changing and evolving over time, which is a beautiful thing. It's part of the life journey that you've set yourselves on as you've committed to be together and stay together over time.
Let me add one thing. A lot of sexual problems that couples get into really comes from not having an erotic love map, a love map of what turns your partner on, what turns your partner off, and what your partner needs from you in order to feel desire. And so when couples lose touch, they don't build this love map, or their love map is so old that they're not keeping in touch with how their partner is changing.
Right. And I think, Dr. Julie, you commented on this before, and I think it was pretty eye-opening when you talked about the part that pornography plays into that, because sometimes when you're watching pornography, you basically expect your partner to do the same thing that you're watching. Like, you condition yourself to be stimulated by what you're seeing on the computer, TV screen, wherever you're consuming your pornography. And that really affects the sexual relationship between you and your partner.
Yeah, it really, really does. You know, what a lot of people don't realize is, first of all, you know, when they get involved in pornography, they are in total control, right? They can switch it on, they can switch it off. They can find whatever kind of sexual interaction they're looking for, and it comes to life, right, in what they're watching or what they're listening to. So pornography is something that is very impersonal, and it's totally under the control of the individual who's engaging in the pornography. Then that partner goes back to their real life partner, and what the heck happens, right? Devin, you pointed it out perfectly, which is that you expect from your partner exactly what this two-dimensional figure, airbrushed, by the way, was doing on the screen.
Right.
And is that real? No. Is that personal? No. Is there any emotional intimacy? No. Can I tell you a story, guys, about a couple? And of course, I'll change the identifying features, but the husband in this couple had been engaging in pornography ever since he was really young, like 8 or 9 years old. And he was now in his mid-30s. And he'd married a woman who, both of them were part of a religion that forbade any kind of sexual interaction other than a kiss on the cheek before marriage. Well, he'd been married before, so he'd had sex before, but she never had. The only thing she'd experienced by the age of 31 was a kiss on the cheek. Wow. So guess what happens the first night, right? After marriage, he wants everything that he's experienced in all the pornography he's been seeing. So you know what? She comes out of that cross-eyed and traumatized to the hilt.
Right.
She is gone. She's out of her body. And that continues for the next 14 years until they finally stepped into my office.
Wow.
And we said, stop. Let's stop. We're stopping all sexual interaction. She's going to start journaling about what that experience was like for her and read those things to him. They're not going to have any kind of sex. She's going to be doing some exercises privately on her own to figure out how to even be in her body and what her body enjoys, what her body likes, where she likes to be touched, where she doesn't like to be touched, what are her preferences. And after about 6 months of that, then we started teeny weeny small, and she had all the control because in effect, she'd felt raped for 14 years. So they turned everything around, but it took them 1.5 years to do it,
Right.
to where they could really have gorgeous, intimate, beautiful, connecting, emotionally intimate and physically intimate, very loving and satisfying sex.
Wow.
So you don't want to get sucked into the pornographic world if you actually want to have a loving partnership.
Well, the other thing is that it's a gateway to having sex with other people, either prostitutes or people who are willing to have sex and are very desperate. And so, it's not just porn. It's really a gateway to many other things that take people away from the relationship.
We want to be respectful of you guys' time, so we only have 2 more questions for you. I'm gonna let my wife go ahead with the next one, then I'll end it for you guys.
So we have a question: is it true that most marital arguments cannot be resolved?
Well, as a matter of fact, you're absolutely right, Asha. So everybody can breathe a sigh of relief. 69% of all problems in a relationship are perpetual problems. They never get resolved. They never go away. So as we brought couples back, a couple thousand couples year after year after year into our lab, the only thing that changed when they decided to have, we asked them to have a conflict discussion. The only thing that changed were their hairstyles and fashions. That was it. Right? So now everybody is wearing sweatpants. That's all we see. But, right, oh God, what a time. So 69% of problems are perpetual, and they're based on differences in personality and lifestyle preferences, right? And, we don't tend to change those things. You think you should be a clone of your partner in order to have a good relationship and be completely compatible in every which way. Wrong. It's not true. You can be very different. John and I are as different as night and day in lots of different ways. He calls himself an indoorsman. His most athletic endeavor is going to be sitting in his red leather chair and moving the lever that makes it go back and
Which
forth.
gets challenging.
I bet.
He's had to weightlift to operate that lever. And my favorite activity is mountain climbing. And I used to be a competitive skier, so things are really different. But what you can do with perpetual problems, which is great, is find a way that you can first dialogue about them and understand why your partner's position is so important to them, way down deep. Is it related to their history somehow? Is it part of their value system? Do they have a dream beneath their position on an issue that they really value and want to fulfill? So you have deep conversations about those perpetual issues and your different sides. And then you can achieve kind of, let's say, compromises around the edges. So for the big difference between John and I in activities, we found one that was a perfect compromise. It was going kayaking. So John can sit down the whole time and I can be outdoors. So, it works.
Oh, that's awesome. So as Asha said in the beginning of the podcast, this is called the Real Relationships Podcast because we want to bring the real back to relationships. So our last question for you guys is, what is real love?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that.
I get to also. Go ahead.
Well,
start.
there are actually, what we found is that there actually are three phases of love. And the first phase, many of us have experienced that even in arranged marriages, people have this phase that psychologists call limerence, where you're really falling in love. And, you're secreting oxytocin, you're secreting testosterone and adrenaline. You're very excited, obsessed with that person. And one of the things about that phase is that you tend to overlook the red flags that are there that tell you that there are problems ahead. And that's wonderful. I mean, it allows you to go on. And that's phase one. Phase two is really when you start really getting serious about the relationship, maybe, making more commitments, you have to build trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very, very important phase that that you have to go through. And almost all the arguments in our apartment lab of the newlyweds were about, can I trust you? Are you going to be there for me?
Right.
When I'm sick, are you going to be there for me? Will you stay sexually faithful to me? Am I more important than your friends, than your mother? All those kinds of questions. Can I trust you? Can I rely on you? And that's a very important phase. And the third phase is about commitment. Am I really your life journey? Am I it? Is this going to be, your journey in life? And, when Julie was talking about, her answer to your earlier question, that whole idea about perpetual problems, a lot of it is based on eventually just kind of accepting your partner as they are. Mm-hmm. And saying, yeah, there are some limitations about Julie, but they're not that important. And, I have many limitations, but, we can accept one another the way we are. And that's how we get over those perpetual problems, is really through acceptance and love and understanding of one another, and rehearsing in our minds, how lucky we are to have this person in our life.
Right.
And, I can really say, that without Julie, my life would have taken a very different turn. I'm a very fortunate human being to have her in my life. And I think about that every day. So those three phases are what love is about, and how it changes over time. Mm-hmm. And so love in a lot of ways is an action. Right. And it's not just being in a state. It's really about making decisions that your partner is important. Cherishing what you have mm-hmm. is a big part of love. And rather than resenting what you're missing,
right.
Cherishing what you have. So that'd be my answer.
That's lovely. Can I give an answer too?
Oh, yeah.
Of course.
Doors open.
I can see it, right? Right between the two of you. So yeah, John is absolutely right in research and so on. And, a lot of people mistake that state of limerence, all the stars in your eyes, right? For that's real love. Well, yeah, maybe there's a star or two every week, maybe. But real love, is really, it's not two-dimensional. It's four-dimensional. It's not like a paper doll cutout mm-hmm. of your ideal, where you're merrily happy. We're all fed these fairy tales, and they're still alive today in all of our TV and our tabloids and People magazine and, all kinds of stuff. And that isn't real love. Yeah. Real love is seeing full on the whole human being that you're lying next to in the morning. The person who has their strengths, their challenges, their beauty, their, difficult moments when, God, you'd rather be on Pluto. Mm. But you see them as a whole human being. And when you spend time, see, I don't think people ever have real love from 5 minutes into the relationship. We've got limits, but not real love. Takes time to build real love. And real love feels like a solid rock. A solid rock, man. You know, it is strong, it's uncrackable. Nobody else is going to get into one of the cracks. It can endure storms, snow, ice, a hurricane, downpours. It can endure over time. Everybody faces terrible challenges. Everybody does. Everybody ends up suffering at one time or another. And sometimes our partners are there for us, sometimes they're not, right? But what we have to understand is that nobody's perfect. No relationship is perfect. So if you can sit down and have a good cup of tea and a pastry with your partner and still have something to say to them, and you feel you're standing on that rock that's solid, that's the ground underneath your feet, that's real love.
Wow. I love that analogy. It touched me. Like I said, this episode I think has been very informative, and I don't say this to a lot of people, but I really find y'all work transformative, and I feel like it's helped me transform as a man, as a husband. I just really enjoy just reading, a lot of the material that you guys got out there. So I'm going to continue to, digest some of the content that y'all have. But if there are people out there who are not as familiar with your work, where can they find you at? Where can they get involved? I know you guys had some virtual webinars that you've been doing. How can they connect with you guys and, just learn how to be better couples?
Well, they can go to www.gottman, GOTTMAN.com, which has a wealth of materials, online stuff, virtual stuff. There's tons and tons and tons of information there that can help. The book you mentioned, Devin, 7 Principles for Making Relationships Work. Marriage work is fabulous. And our latest book is 8 Dates, Essential Conversations for a Lifetime of Love. And given our day and age with COVID, it's all about having great, deepening conversations. Right. And that's what that book is all about, what to talk about and how to talk about.
And very soon we're going to have an app that can live on your phone with all these videos that Julie and I have created, 87 videos for how to build these rituals of connection, turn toward, deal with conflict constructively, and so on.
That's awesome. We'll be looking forward for that.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people do. So we appreciate you guys being on this podcast. A lot of people are going to love it.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure. And until next time, you guys, keep it real.
Yes, sir.